After a sharp kick under the table, I flew face first into the salad. My mother-in-law and husband laughed loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "Look what this wild girl is doing again." I carefully wiped my face with a napkin and stood up from my chair. They didn't yet know that I'd do it in a second. My name is Vivian Marsh, I'm 29, and I used to believe humiliation was just the price of belonging to a family that wasn't mine by blood. The restaurant had gone quiet the way rooms do when they are deciding whether to look away or lean in. My mother-in-law, Constance, dabbed her eyes from laughing, diamonds catching the candlelight. My husband, Grant, still chuckling, reached for his wine like nothing unusual had happened, like his wife's face hitting a plate of arugula was simply Tuesday's entertainment. 3 years of marriage had taught me the choreography of these dinners. Constance would provoke. Grant would enable. I would absorb it, smiling, because making a scene was beneath the family name. I smoothed my dress, sat back down, and picked up my fork like nothing had touched me at all. "You're right," I said pleasantly. "I am a wild girl." Constance's smile faltered, just slightly, like she'd expected tears instead of teeth. I speared a cherry tomato and let the silence stretch until it belonged to me instead of them. Grant had proposed in this same restaurant, at this same table, 3 years ago, promising me a family who would love me like their own. What he hadn't mentioned was that Constance's love came with conditions I'd spent 3 years failing to meet. The wrong accent at first, then the wrong last name, then simply the wrong woman for a son she'd never wanted to share. Wild Girl had started as a joke about my laugh being too loud at their country club. It had calcified into something crueler with every dinner since, a leash disguised as affection. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the last 6 months quietly becoming someone they hadn't accounted for. I'd started reviewing Grant's business account statements 2 months ago, back when I was still just trying to understand where our savings had gone. What I found wasn't infidelity. It was worse, and far more useful. Constance reached for her wine, smug now that I'd apparently returned to my role. "Grant tells me you've taken up some little hobby. Bookkeeping, was it?" I smiled. "Forensic accounting, actually. I finished the certification in March." Her glass paused halfway to her lips. Grant's laugh faltered first, the sound curdling into something uncertain. Constance recovered faster, waving a manicured hand like she was swatting away an insect. "How industrious," she said, in the tone she used for things she considered beneath discussion. I didn't push further that night. I'd learned patience was a weapon they'd never taught me to expect from someone they'd spent 3 years calling wild, careless, too much. I let the dinner finish exactly as it always did, Constance holding court, Grant nodding along, me existing at the edges of my own marriage like a guest who hadn't been formally invited. But I watched Grant differently on the drive home. The way his fingers tapped the steering wheel when I mentioned the numbers. The way he changed the subject twice before we reached our driveway. That night, once his breathing slowed into sleep, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and pulled up 6 months of research I'd been quietly assembling. Invoices from a shell company registered to Constance's maiden name, payments routed through Grant's family business account, numbers that didn't match anything filed with the actual accountants. It wasn't infidelity I'd stumbled onto. It was theft. Years of it. Constance had been quietly draining her own son's trust fund and routing the difference through accounts with my husband's signature on them. Grant wasn't just complicit. He'd known the whole time. The trust fund had been set up by Grant's late father, meant to pass to Grant's own children someday. Children Constance had never once mentioned, children I now understood she'd never intended to let exist under my name. I found the clause on a rainy Thursday, buried in paperwork Grant kept locked in a drawer he thought I didn't have a key to. If Grant divorced without an heir, control of the trust reverted entirely to Constance. Every dinner where she'd called me wild. Every joke about my unsuitability. Every kick under the table dressed up as affection, it wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was strategy. She needed me gone before I became inconvenient in a different way. Grant had known about the clause since our wedding day. He'd married me anyway, then spent 3 years letting his mother dismantle me piece by piece rather than risk the money that came with staying loyal to her instead of me. I confronted him that Sunday morning, laptop open between our coffee cups, 6 months of evidence laid out like a verdict already written. He didn't deny it. He just looked tired, the way men look when they've been caught rehearsing an excuse for years and finally realize it was never going to be good enough. "It's not what you think," he said. "It's exactly what I think," I said. "You just never thought I'd find it." I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I closed my laptop, finished my coffee, and told Grant I needed a few days at my sister's, a lie so ordinary he didn't even blink accepting it. What I actually needed was time to build something Constance couldn't laugh her way out of. My sister's husband, Daniel, was a litigator who specialized in trust and estate fraud, the kind of quiet, meticulous man who collected receipts the way other people collected grudges. I laid Constance's shell company on his dining table like a gift he hadn't known he wanted. "This isn't just a paperwork issue," he said, scanning the documents. "This is embezzlement with a paper trail a first-year associate could win." "I don't want to win quietly," I said. "I want her to lose the way she made me lose. In public." He smiled, the first genuinely warm smile I'd seen in months. "Then let's build you a courtroom with an audience." We spent 11 days assembling it properly. Forensic statements, falsified invoices cross-referenced against actual vendor records, a timeline that made Constance's greed impossible to dispute or soften. Grant called 4 times a day. I let most of them go to voicemail. On the 12th day, I drove back to the house we shared, walked into his study, and told him exactly one thing. "Tell your mother dinner reservations are for 6 people this Friday." He didn't ask why. 3 years of marriage had taught him not to question the moments I sounded calmest. Those were always the ones that mattered most. I invited Daniel and my sister. I invited Constance's accountant, a nervous man named Philip who'd been quietly feeding me records for 2 weeks once he realized whose signature had actually been forged on half the transfers. I invited a family court mediator who specialized in cases exactly like the one about to unfold across white tablecloths and candlelight. Constance arrived expecting her usual audience for her usual performance. Instead, she found a table full of people who already knew everything she'd spent years hiding. "What is this?" she asked, settling into her chair with the practiced grace of a woman who'd never once been ambushed at her own family dinner. "A wild girl's homework," I said, sliding the folder across the table. She opened it slowly. I watched her face cycle through the same choreography I'd learned from her: dismissal, irritation, and finally, unmistakably, fear. "This is fabricated," she said, too quickly. Philip cleared his throat. "Actually, Constance, I authenticated every document myself." Grant hadn't touched his wine. He was staring at his mother like he was seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time in his adult life. "Mom," he said quietly. "Tell me this isn't true." Her silence answered for her. Constance's silence stretched long enough that even the restaurant staff seemed to sense something had shifted, hovering near the kitchen doors instead of approaching our table. "Everything I did," she finally said, voice sharp with the particular fury of someone caught rather than someone sorry, "I did to protect this family." "You stole from your own son," Daniel said evenly, "and let his wife take the blame for a personality you invented to distract from it." I watched something in Grant finally break loose. 3 years of quiet complicity cracking under the weight of hearing it stated plainly by someone who wasn't me. He wasn't defending her anymore. He was looking at the woman across the table like a stranger wearing his mother's face. "The wild girl comments," he said slowly. "The dinners. That was never about Vivian being difficult. That was you making sure nobody looked too closely at the actual numbers." Constance's composure finally cracked. "I did what was necessary." "So did I said, sliding the mediator's card across the table. "The trust reverts to Grant immediately, minus what your lawyers will spend defending the embezzlement charges. Phillips already filed the report with the state." Constance stood so fast her chair nearly toppled, the same violent motion that had once sent me face first into a salad. This time, nobody laughed.